Across the wide open prairies of Iowa, where the land stretches flat and endless beneath the sky. There are places where roads meet rivers and something feels very wrong. At these crossings, the wind seems to slow. The water flows darker. And the silence presses in heavier than it should. Long before paved highways and electric lights, travelers crossed these rivers by foot, wagon, and horse. Some never made it to the other side. Floods rose without warning. Bridges collapsed in the night. And bodies were swallowed by muddy currents, never recovered. Locals whisper that these crossings are not just dangerous. They are haunted. Drivers report seeing figures standing in the road just before the bridge. Farmers hear splashing footsteps when no one is there. And some claim that once you stop at certain crossings after dark, the river does not want to let you leave. Tonight, we follow the prairie roads into the heart of Iowa, to uncover the most haunted river crossings hidden among fields of tall grass and quiet water. 20 places where journeys ended. Where fear soaked into the soil. And where the river still waits. Where the journey never ends. If you were driving alone at night and saw a figure standing in the middle of a rural river crossing, would you slow down to help or would you speed up and never look back? Take a deep breath. The road ahead is darker than it looks. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. Before we begin, get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow and steady. Iowa is often seen as calm and peaceful. Rolling fields. Quiet farms. Endless skies. But beneath that calm surface lies a history shaped by water. Rivers carved the land. They fed crops. And they took lives. Before modern bridges, river crossings were some of the most dangerous places on the prairie. People crossed during storms. At night. When the water was high and the road disappeared beneath the current. Wagons overturned. Horses panicked. Families were lost in moments. Many of these crossings still exist today. Some marked only by gravel roads and old warning signs. Others forgotten entirely, hidden by grass and time. Those who pass them after sunset often describe strange experiences. A sudden drop in temperature. The sound of rushing water growing louder. A feeling of being watched from the riverbank. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted prairie river crossings in Iowa. Each one shaped by tragedy, silence, and restless energy. And before we step onto the first crossing, let me ask you something. If your car stalled in the middle of a flooded prairie crossing at night, and you heard footsteps approaching through the water, would you get out to Loca? Or would you stay locked inside and hope help arrives? The Willow Bend crossing sits where the river curves sharply through tall grass, narrowing suddenly before widening again downstream. During the day, it looks harmless, a shallow stretch where water slides quietly over stone and silt. Grass bends with the current. Birds gather along the banks. To someone passing through, it appears like a place meant to be crossed. For generations, it was. Wagons, carts, and later vehicles used the crossing as a shortcut between settlements. The river was usually low, predictable, and easy to judge. Locals knew to slow down, to watch the current, and to listen for changes upstream. Most crossings passed without incident. But the river had a habit of changing without warning. Storms far upstream could send sudden surges racing toward Willow Bend. The curve in the river trapped debris and redirected force, turning shallow water into a powerful sweep in moments. Several times over the years, wagons entered the crossing just as the water rose. They never made it across. Wood splintered. Wheels lifted. Animals panicked. The river pulled everything sideways, rolling wagons onto their sides and dragging them downstream into tall grass and deeper water. Some travelers escaped. Others did not. After each flood, the crossing was repaired and reopened. Confidence returned quickly. Memory faded. The river appeared calm again, as if nothing had happened. Traffic resumed, and Willow Bend Crossing continued to be used. Then the sightings began. Drivers traveling late at night reported seeing figures standing in the water near the center of the crossing. At first, the shapes were mistaken for reflections or shadows cast by headlights through tall grass. They appeared briefly, then vanished as vehicles passed. But the figures returned. They stood ankle-deep in the water, spaced unevenly across the crossing, facing the road. They did not wave or signal. They did not step forward or retreat. They simply stood, watching. Drivers slowed instinctively. The sensation was immediate and shared. Engines idled lower. Hands tightened on steering wheels. Something about the figures demanded attention without making any request. Headlights revealed little detail. The figures appeared solid but indistinct, their outlines softened by mist rising off the river. Clothing seemed old-fashioned, heavy, suited for travel rather than standing still. Faces remained shadowed, turned toward approaching vehicles. As cars passed through the crossing, the figures did not react. They did not move aside. They did not turn their heads. Water flowed around their legs without splashing, as if the current avoided them. Once a vehicle cleared the crossing and continued down the road, the figures were no longer visible in the mirrors. They did not follow. Reports increased over time. Different drivers described the same experience on different nights, often unaware of previous accounts. Some thought they had imagined it until they heard similar stories from others. Local authorities investigated. They found no trespassers. No footprints in the mud. No signs that anyone had been standing in the water. Cameras installed nearby recorded only empty crossings and drifting mist. On nights when the river was low and calm, when there was no danger of flooding. On nights when water levels were high or storms threatened, the figures were never seen. The timing confused investigators. If the figures were warnings, they appeared when there was nothing to warn against. If they were memories, they chose moments of safety rather than danger. Some locals offered a different interpretation. They believed the figures were not warning drivers away, but reminding them to look. To slow down. To recognize where they were. The figures stood exactly where wagons had overturned, marking the points where judgment had failed and the river had taken control. The figures never pointed. They never reached out. They never blocked the path. They watched. Drivers who made eye contact reported a strong urge to stop, even when the crossing was dry and clear. Most resisted, choosing instead to continue through slowly. Those who stopped briefly found the figures unchanged, unmoving, patient. As soon as the vehicle moved again, the figures faded. No one has ever approached them on foot. Those who considered it reported an overwhelming sense of discomfort at the thought. As if crossing the boundary between road and water at night would be a mistake that could not be undone. The crossing itself began to feel different after dark. Sound carried strangely. Water seemed louder than it should be. Headlights reflected off the surface in uneven patterns, stretching shadows toward the figures and pulling them back again. Some drivers reported counting the figures. The number varied. Sometimes 2. Sometimes 3 or 4. Never the same arrangement twice. Yet the spacing always felt deliberate, as though marking positions rather than forming a group. Historians researching the area found records of multiple flood incidents. The number of wagons lost over the years matched roughly with the maximum number of figures reported. Names were incomplete. Details were sparse. But patterns aligned closely enough to raise questions. The figures never appear during the day. Sunlight reveals only grass, stone, and shallow water. Children play nearby. Birds move freely through the crossing. Nothing suggests anything unusual has ever happened there. At night, Willow Bend Crossing becomes something else. The road narrows. The river darkens. And figures stand ankle-deep in the water, motionless and silent, watching vehicles pass through a place where judgment once failed and momentum could not be stopped. They do not signal danger. They do not demand attention. They simply observe, steady and unchanging, as if ensuring that those who pass remember that the river does not always announce its intentions, and that some crossings deserve respect long after the water has calmed. Drivers who know the stories slow down. They keep their eyes forward. They cross carefully. And when they glance back, the water is. The figures gone. Leaving only tall grass. Quiet current. And the uneasy certainty. By those who never made it across. Old Stone Ford was once the only crossing for miles. A shallow stretch of river where stone slabs broke the current just enough for wagons and later vehicles to pass. Long before paved roads and bridges, this ford connected scattered communities, tying families to schools, markets, and one another. The river was wide but usually calm, and the stones beneath the surface gave a sense of stability that people trusted. Families crossed here even in heavy rain. They knew the risks, but necessity outweighed caution. Parents held children close. Horses and engines moved slowly, feeling for the stones beneath the water. The ford became part of daily life, a place crossed so often it faded into routine. Stories were shared of difficult passages, but few spoke of true danger. The river changed when the rain lingered. During long storms, the water rose quickly, dark and fast-moving. The stones vanished beneath the surface, turning the ford into a shallow illusion. Even then, some attempted the crossing, believing experience would guide them through. Most succeeded. A few did not. Records from nearby towns list incidents without detail. A carriage swept downstream. A vehicle stalled mid-crossing and could not be recovered in time. A family delayed and never reached the opposite bank. Names were recorded, dates noted, and the river flowed on. Over time, a bridge was built miles away, and Old Stone Ford fell out of use. The road remained. Drivers still passed nearby, especially at night, when alternate routes felt longer and less familiar. The ford itself looked unchanged, stones still visible during dry seasons, water sliding quietly over them. It appeared harmless, even peaceful. Then the reports began. Late-night drivers described hearing children crying near the water as they approached the ford. The sound was soft at first, distant enough to question. It carries the unmistakable tone of distress, high and trembling, echoing just above the sound of the river. The cries seemed to come from the bank. Some drivers slowed, rolling down windows to listen. The sound grew clearer then, multiple voices overlapping, calling out through the darkness. The riverbank remained empty, illuminated only by the faint spill of headlights and moonlight on moving water. When headlights turned toward the sound, the crying stopped. The silence was immediate and complete. No fading. No lingering echo. Just the steady rush of water over stone. Drivers who stepped out of their vehicles found nothing. No footprints. No movement. The riverbank looked undisturbed. The experience repeated for others. Always near the same stretch of road. Always late at night. Always when visibility was low and the surroundings felt isolated. The cries never occurred during the day. They never continued once light was directed toward them. Some drivers reported feeling watched. Not by a presence they could see, but by the awareness that something had been there moments before. Turning headlights back toward the road often brought a sense of relief, as if attention had been redirected away from the water. Authorities investigated after multiple reports. They found no evidence of people near the ford at night. No children were reported missing in the area. Sound tests showed the river could carry noise in unusual ways, but nothing explained the clarity or consistency of the cries. Local residents shared older stories. They spoke of times when families crossed the ford together, children laughing or complaining as water splashed around wheels and hooves. They remembered moments when storms rose faster than expected, when the river took control without warning. The crying never sounded angry. Witnesses described it as frightened and confused, not demanding attention but hoping for it. The voices did not call names. They did not ask for help directly. They simply cried, as if expecting someone to hear. No one ever saw a source. Not a figure. Not a reflection. Not movement beyond rippling water and bending grass. Some drivers stopped returning to the area. They chose longer routes, avoiding the ford entirely. Others continued to pass through, bracing themselves for the possibility of hearing the cries again. Many reported that once heard, the sound lingered in memory longer than expected. Weather seemed to play a role. The cries were reported most often during or after rain, when the river was higher and the stones less visible. On dry nights, the ford remained quiet, indistinguishable from any other stretch of water. No recordings captured the sound clearly. Audio devices picked up only the river and wind. Any hint of crying faded into static. Witnesses insisted the sound was unmistakable in person, close and present in a way recordings could not replicate. The bridge built upstream reduced traffic further. Old Stone Ford became a place passed by rather than crossed. Vegetation grew along the banks. The road narrowed. Still, drivers reported the same experience, unchanged by time or development. Some believe the sound is memory. They suggest the river holds echoes of moments when fear was real and immediate, when children clung to parents as water rose around them. Others believe the cries serve as warning, discouraging passage during dangerous conditions. No explanation has been confirmed. What remains consistent is the pattern. The sound appears briefly. It draws attention. It stops when illuminated. It leaves behind only uncertainty and Old Stone Ford stands quiet most nights. Water moves over stone. Grass bends along the bank. The road curves away into darkness. To a passing driver, it looks ordinary, unremarkable. But when rain falls and the river swells, some slow their vehicles as they near the crossing. They listen. And when they hear crying near the water, they know better than to search too closely. They keep their headlights forward. And they drive on, leaving the ford and its silence behind. Black mud road runs through low farmland and marsh, following a route shaped more by habit than design. For most of the year it is unremarkable, a narrow stretch of packed earth and gravel that locals use to reach fields and fishing spots. The road ends at a shallow river crossing where water usually runs slow and clear enough to see the stones beneath. After storms, that crossing changes. Heavy rain swells the river and turns the road surface slick and dark, giving Black Mud Road its name. The water rises just enough to blur the edges of the crossing, but rarely enough to seem dangerous. To passing drivers and walkers, it appears passable, if approached with care. That assumption has proven costly. The first disappearances were written off as accidents. A vehicle found abandoned near the crossing after a night of storms. Search teams found no signs of struggle, only tire tracks leading cleanly to the water's edge. The tracks did not curve or skid. They did not show signs of sudden braking. They simply ended, a line straight toward the river as if the vehicle had paused deliberately. No tracks emerged on the opposite bank. No debris floated downstream. Footprints told a stranger story. In several cases, prints were found leading away from the parked vehicles. The impressions continued past the muddy shoreline, into the shallows. Then disappeared beneath the surface. None reappeared on the far side. The river is not especially deep at the crossing. Under normal conditions, a person could wade across with water reaching only the waist. After storms, the current strengthens, but not enough to explain complete disappearance without trace. The bottom is mostly silt and stone, with no sudden drop or sinkhole documented. Yet nothing was ever recovered. Over time, a pattern emerged. Disappearances only occurred after storms. Not during light rain, but after heavy systems that altered the flow and color of the water. The river would run dark and slow, carrying fine sediment that clouded visibility. The crossing itself would appear flatter, smoother, almost level with the road. Locals noticed something unsettling during these periods. Standing at the edge of the crossing produced a subtle sense of depth that did not match what the eye saw. The water looked shallow, but felt farther away, as if the surface marked a boundary rather than a continuation. Sound behaved oddly. The rush of water seemed muted, absorbed rather than carried. Those who approached described hesitation. Not fear, but uncertainty. The distance across felt difficult to judge. Steps felt heavier near the edge. Some reported the sensation of being drawn forward, not by force, but by expectation, as if crossing was the natural next action. Most resisted and stepped back. Others did not. Investigators documented the tracks carefully. Tire marks showed no struggle, no attempt to reverse. In some cases, doors were left open, keys still in the ignition. The decision to exit the vehicle appeared calm and unhurried. The steps into the water suggested confidence, not panic. Once submerged, all evidence ended. The crossing itself does not remain constant. After storms pass, the water recedes. The road reappears, intact and solid. The river returns to its usual clarity. Crossing becomes easy again. During these periods, nothing unusual occurs. No one vanishes. The danger seems dormant. Warning signs have been placed, but they do little to explain the phenomenon. They advise against crossing during high water, yet the river rarely looks threatening enough to justify fear. Visitors unfamiliar with the history often assume the signs are exaggerated or outdated. Those who know the stories avoid the area entirely after storms. Researchers studying the site found no geological explanation sufficient to explain the disappearances. The riverbed showed no cavities or sudden depth changes. Flow measurements varied, but not dramatically. The mud at the crossing was deep enough to leave impressions, but not to trap vehicles or people. Attention turned to perception. The crossing lies in a shallow depression where water spreads evenly rather than flowing quickly. After storms, sediment creates a smooth, dark surface that hides depth cues. The brain struggles to judge distance and movement. Combined with fatigue or low light, this could lead to miscalculation. Yet this explanation fails to account for the calm nature of the tracks. People did not rush or stumble. They walked forward as if certain of the path. The absence of struggle suggests something more than simple misjudgment. Local belief centers on the idea of transition. The crossing is not just a place where road meets river, but where boundaries blur after storms. Water and land exchange roles. Direction loses clarity. Those who enter during these moments step into a space that does not behave like the rest of the river. Some say the river opens briefly. Not visibly, but functionally. That it accepts movement without return, closing again once conditions normalize. Survivors who turn back describe a strong internal debate. A moment where continuing forward felt easier than stopping. The decision to leave required conscious effort, like waking from a dream. Once distance was gained, the feeling vanished completely. At dawn after storms, the crossing looks peaceful. Mist rises gently. The water lies flat and dark. The road appears to continue straight through, uninterrupted. Tire marks stop at the edge. Footprints move forward. And then there is nothing. Black mud road remains open, unfenced, and quiet. The crossing is still used during dry weather without incident. It is only when storms reshape the river that the danger returns. The place does not call attention to itself. It does not roar or flood dramatically. It simply changes enough to invite movement at the wrong moment. Those who cross safely later often remark on how ordinary it feels, how difficult it is to imagine anything going wrong there. But the ground remembers. Each set of tracks that never reached the far bank becomes part of the story pressed into mud and water. The crossing waits for conditions to align again, when rain darkens the river and the road seems to continue just a little too smoothly. And when it does, the marks appear once more. Stopping at the water's edge. Continuing into the river. And never coming back out. Raven Creek Crossing sits where a narrow road dips toward a shallow stream before climbing again into open land. The water moves quickly here, broken by stones and low banks that keep it from ever fully settling. Fences line both sides of the road, their posts worn smooth by years of weather and passing animals. During the day, it feels like a place meant only to be passed through. As evening approaches, the ravens arrive. They come in small groups at first, gliding in from distant trees, their wings cutting quietly through the cooling air. One by one, they settle onto the fence posts that run along the crossing. More follow until nearly every post is occupied. The birds are silent. They do not call to one another. They do not shift or fight for space. They simply watch, heads tilted slightly, eyes fixed on the road and the water beyond. Drivers slow instinctively, unsettled by the symmetry of it, by the sense of being observed from both sides at once. Locals say the ravens have always gathered here. Long before cars used the crossing, the birds lined the fences and rocks at dusk, marking the transition between day and night. Farmers learned to avoid stopping there after sunset. Travelers timed their journeys to pass through before the birds arrived. When darkness falls, the ravens remain. They do not roost or disperse as they do elsewhere. They hold their positions as the last light drains from the sky and the crossing slips into shadow. The water grows louder then, its splashing amplified by the quiet that settles over the fields. This is when the footsteps begin. Those who stop at Raven Creek Crossing after nightfall report hearing movement around their vehicles. Soft at first, like water disturbed by a passing animal. Then clearer, more deliberate. Splashes circle the car, uneven and close, as if someone is waiting just beyond the headlights. They never rush. They never retreat. The pattern remains steady, patient, as though waiting for something to happen. Inside the vehicle, the air feels heavier. Windows fog quickly, even on dry nights. The sound of the creek seems louder than it should be, pressing in from all sides. Those inside describe a strong urge not to open the doors, not to step out, despite curiosity or concern. Looking through the windshield reveals the ravens still perched on the fence posts. They do not react to the movement below. They do not turn their heads. They remain perfectly still, silhouettes against the dark, as if the activity near the water does not concern them. Some drivers report seeing ripples in the creek that do not match the sound of the footsteps. Water breaks against stones where nothing stands. Small waves move upstream briefly, then vanish. The splashing continues, circling, unhurried. The footsteps never approach the doors. They keep their distance, always just beyond reach, close enough to be heard clearly but never close enough to touch. The sound carries a sense of weight, of something solid moving through water, yet nothing ever presses against the vehicle. Those who stay longer notice something else. The footsteps sometimes pause directly beside the car, lingering there long enough to become unbearable. In those moments, the ravens shift slightly on their posts, adjusting their balance, but still making no sound. Then the footsteps resume their circuit, as if the pause was part of a routine. Local stories suggest the crossing has always been watched. According to older accounts, Raven Creek marked a boundary between lands once disputed. Arguments were settled there. Decisions were made that affected families on both sides of the water. The ravens, drawn by activity and remains, gathered often enough that the place took their name. Over time, the reasons faded, but the gathering did not. Some believe the birds act as witnesses rather than participants. They arrive to observe, not to interfere. The footsteps, they say, belong to something that does not cross fully, that moves endlessly along the edge without choosing a side. Researchers have attempted to explain the sounds. They point to water flow, animal movement, and acoustics shaped by the surrounding terrain. None can account for the consistent circling pattern or the way the footsteps respond to a vehicle's presence, growing louder when engines are turned off and quieter when they restart. Cameras set up near the crossing record the ravens clearly. Footage shows them arriving at dusk, perching in neat rows, remaining long after night has fallen. Audio recordings capture splashing sounds, but video reveals nothing moving through the water. Infrared imaging shows only ripples, no heat signatures, no bodies. Those who leave the crossing describe lingering unease. Some hear faint splashing sounds days later when near water elsewhere. Others notice ravens watching them longer than usual, perched nearby in unexpected places. The feeling fades with time, but the memory remains sharp. Most drivers do not stop at Raven Creek Crossing anymore. They slow, pass through, and accelerate on the far side, relieved when the ravens finally disappear in the rearview mirror. The crossing returns to darkness behind them, the creek continuing its restless flow. By morning, the place looks ordinary again. Fence posts stand empty. The road is quiet. The water moves as it always has, shallow and quick. Those who have been there after dark know better. They remember the way the footsteps circled without revealing their source. The sense that the crossing was aware of their presence, patient enough to wait. Raven Creek Crossing does not block the road. It does not trap or threaten. It simply observes. At dusk, the ravens return to their posts, lining the fences with quiet precision. And when night falls, and a vehicle pauses too long near the water, the splashing footsteps circle once more, moving through the creek and gravel, unseen but unmistakably present. Watching. As they always have. Cottonwood Ford sits beneath ancient trees whose thick branches stretch wide over the riverbank. Their roots twist deep into the soil, gripping the earth as if holding it in place against the water's force. The danger was never obvious. Most days, the water moved slowly, reflecting leaves and sky in soft patterns. The crossing looked calm, even inviting, especially beneath the shade of the cottonwoods. Travelers trusted it because it appeared unchanged year after year. But floods here were fast and deadly. Storms upstream could send walls of water racing toward the ford with little warning. The river rose suddenly, transforming the shallow crossing into a powerful surge that swept away anything caught in its path. Vehicles stalled. Wagons tipped. People underestimated the speed and strength, believing they had time. Many did not. Over the years, Cottonwood Ford claimed more than anyone wanted to count. Rescue attempts often failed because the current changed too quickly. By the time help arrived, the river had already taken what it came for. Eventually, the crossing was officially closed. Barriers were placed. Warning signs went up. Maps were updated. But the ford remained accessible. And curiosity drew people back. Especially at night. When the trees whispered. And the river sounded deceptively gentle. That was when the handprints appeared. The first report came from a couple who had parked near the old crossing after dusk. Sitting inside their car, they heard nothing unusual. No footsteps. No voices. Yet when they prepared to leave, they noticed wet handprints pressed against the outside of the windows. The marks were clear. 5 fingers. Full palms. Streaks where water had run downward. The ground outside was dry. No one stood nearby. The trees were still. Assuming it was condensation or a prank, they wiped the glass clean and drove away. The handprints returned the next night. This time, they appeared while the vehicle was locked and unattended. Wet impressions formed slowly on the windows, spreading outward as if hands were pressing and holding before sliding away. More reports followed. Visitors described sitting quietly in their cars when sudden tapping sounds caught their attention. Looking up revealed fresh handprints forming on the glass, damp and unmistakable. Some appeared high, near the top of windows, as if someone stood taller than the vehicle. Others clustered lower, unevenly spaced. No footprints were ever found. The soil beneath the cottonwoods remained undisturbed. Cameras installed by local authorities captured empty spaces where the prints appeared moments later. Moisture readings showed no environmental cause that could explain the patterns. The handprints were always wet. Not muddy. Not dusty. Just water, clear and cool, leaving temporary marks that evaporated slowly. On colder nights, the prints lingered longer, beads of moisture clinging to glass even after the surrounding surface dried. The handprints never appeared inside the vehicle. They remained outside, pressed against the glass, separated by a boundary that could not be crossed. Locals shared older stories. They spoke of people trapped inside vehicles as floodwaters rose, hands pressed against windows in panic as the river surrounded them. The cottonwoods, they said, had witnessed everything, their roots anchored while lives were swept away. The ford changed after each flood, but the trees remained. Some believe the handprints are warnings. They appear to remind visitors that the ford is not a place to linger, that the river can rise without notice. The hands press outward, not to pull, but to be seen. Others believe the prints are echoes. Moments of desperation repeated by the land itself, replayed when conditions are quiet enough. The water leaves its memory behind, marking glass the way it once marked air. The timing is unpredictable. Some nights pass without incident. Other times, handprints appear in clusters, covering windows on multiple vehicles at once. They never form on doors or metal surfaces, only on glass, where transparency once offered false hope. The cottonwood trees seem to play a role. On nights when the wind moves their branches, the handprints are more common. Leaves rustle softly, shadows shift, and the river surface grows restless even when water levels remain low. Visitors who step out of their vehicles rarely see the prints forming. They appear only when someone is inside, seated, still, and watching through glass. Opening a door causes the marks to fade rapidly, moisture evaporating as if exposed to open air breaks the effect. No one has ever been harmed at Cottonwood Ford since the crossing closed. The river has remained within its banks. The danger now is memory, not current. Yet the handprints persist, appearing without warning, repeating without explanation. By morning, all traces are gone. Sunlight dries the glass. The river reflects blue sky and cottonwood leaves. The ford looks peaceful again, unchanged and harmless. But at night, beneath the ancient trees, the past presses close. Hands appear where they once did, wet and urgent against car windows, leaving marks that ask to be noticed, then vanish without a sound. Cottonwood Ford does not chase visitors away. It does not flood. It does not trap. It only reminds. The river remembers every crossing. The trees remember every moment of stillness before the water surged. And when someone sits quietly at the ford after dark, looking out through glass at calm water, the hands return. Pressing gently. Insisting that some places are never as safe as they appear. And that the past has not fully loosened its grip on the surface of the present. The Prairie line crossing was built too low, pressed into a shallow dip where the land flattened and water naturally gathered. When the road was first laid, the ground seemed firm enough, and the decision saved time and effort. Wagons crossed without trouble during dry seasons, their wheels cutting steady lines through dust and grass. When storms rolled across the prairie, water rushed down from higher ground and spilled over the road. The crossing vanished beneath a moving sheet of brown, shallow but forceful, carrying mud, stones, and debris with it. Travelers learned to judge the depth by sight and instinct, though those judgments were often wrong. Wagons lined up on either side of the water, drivers weighing risk against necessity. Most waited for the flow to slow. Some did not. Records from nearby towns mention losses without detail. A wagon overturned during a sudden surge. A team of animals panicked and broke free. Supplies disappeared downstream, never recovered. The prairie absorbed these events quietly, leaving little behind except ruts that filled with silt and memory. As time passed, the crossing fell out of regular use. Bridges were built elsewhere. Roads were raised and reinforced. The Prairie line crossing remained, unaltered and exposed, a reminder of earlier choices made under pressure. Grass grew thick along its edges, and the road itself faded into the surrounding land. At night, the area feels heavier. Wind moves low across open ground, carrying distant sounds farther than expected. The absence of trees leaves little to block noise or light. On clear nights, stars stretch uninterrupted across the sky, reflected faintly in pooled water near the crossing. It was during these nights that the sounds began. Travelers camping nearby reported hearing a slow, grinding noise beneath the water. At first, it resembled shifting stones or the movement of sediment. The sound repeated in steady rhythm, circular and deliberate. It sounded like wagon wheels turning. The noise came from beneath the surface, muffled by water and mud. It was not fast or chaotic. Each rotation dragged heavily, as if wheels struggled against resistance. The sound moved slowly, grinding through stone and silt with patient force. No movement was visible above the water. Moonlight revealed a smooth surface broken only by ripples from the current. There were no wakes, no splashes, no signs of anything pushing through. Yet the sound continued, unwavering, passing beneath the road from one side to the other. Witnesses described a sense of pressure. Standing near the crossing made the air feel thicker, as if weight settled into the chest. The sound never rushed. It maintained the same slow pace, as though following an established path. Those who timed it noted that the duration matched the length of the crossing, ending only after the sound should have cleared the road entirely. Then there was silence. The water flowed on, ordinary once more. Insects resumed their calls. Wind reclaimed the open space. Nothing remained to suggest what had just passed beneath the surface. The phenomenon occurred most often after heavy rain. When water covered the crossing fully and the ground was soft, the grinding sounds returned. During dry spells, the area remained quiet, indistinguishable from any other stretch of prairie road. Attempts to record the sound produced mixed results. Audio devices sometimes captured a low, circular rumble beneath the sound of water. Other times, nothing appeared on playback. Those present insisted the noise had been clear and unmistakable, its absence on recording only adding to the confusion. No physical explanation satisfied investigators. There were no underground pipes or culverts beneath the crossing. Geological surveys showed compacted soil and stone, nothing capable of producing such rhythmic movement. Wildlife activity was ruled out. The sound followed no known natural pattern. Local stories filled the gap. They spoke of wagons that never made it across, pulled under by sudden surges. Of wheels that sank deep into mud and stone, trapped as water rose around them. Of drivers who abandoned their loads, leaving the prairie to claim what it would. Only the wheels, turning slowly, endlessly, as if completing a crossing that was never finished. Those who heard the sound rarely stayed long. The experience left them unsettled, thoughtful. Some returned during daylight, expecting to see signs of disturbance beneath the road. They found nothing. The crossing looked unchanged, water flowing as it always had. Over time, the prairie line crossing became a place of avoidance. Locals warned newcomers not to camp nearby after rain. Stories were shared without exaggeration, passed along as caution rather than legend. Most listened. The prairie itself remains indifferent. Grass bends in the wind. Water rises and falls with the weather. The road lies low, just as it always has, vulnerable to the same forces that shaped its history. On nights after heavy storms, when water covers the crossing and the land falls quiet, the sound sometimes returns. Slow. Circular. Grinding. Wagon wheels turning beneath the surface, pressing through mud and stone, following a route laid down long ago. The rhythm does not change. It does not hurry. It moves as if the crossing still matters. As if the journey must continue. And when the sound fades, the prairie holds its silence, leaving only water, road, and the weight of something unseen passing beneath. Cold Hollow Crossing lies along a narrow bend of river where the land dips unexpectedly, forming a shallow basin sheltered from wind and sun. On maps, it appears no different from any other crossing. A simple stretch of ground where water narrows and travelers once passed on foot or by cart. Yet anyone who approaches notices the change immediately. The air grows colder. Even in midsummer, when surrounding fields shimmer with heat, Cold Hollow feels untouched by warmth. They spoke of frost forming on grass while nearby land remained green. Water at the crossing stayed dark and cold, resisting the seasonal thaw. Animals avoided the area instinctively, skirting wide around it rather than drink or cross. Those who ignored the signs rarely lingered long. Cold Hollow earned its name through repetition. Travelers reported numb fingers even on clear days. Metal tools chilled painfully fast. Fires built near the crossing struggled to hold heat, their flames low and unsteady. The cold did not spread outward. It remained contained, as if held in place by the shape of the land. The river itself flows quietly there. No rapids. No visible turbulence. Yet the water absorbs sound, dulling splashes and muting footsteps along the bank. Standing near it produces a sense of distance, as if the crossing exists slightly apart from the rest of the landscape. The figures began appearing decades later. At first, they were mistaken for travelers resting along the river. Shapes stood at intervals on the bank, motionless, facing the water. From a distance, they looked solid and real, wrapped in long coats unsuitable for warm weather. Their posture was upright, deliberate, almost formal. Those who approached saw no faces. The figures never turned. They did not react to voices or movement. Coats hung heavy and old-fashioned, their outlines softened by mist rising from the cold ground. No breath escaped them, though the air around was thick with visible vapor. When observers drew too close, the figures vanished. Not abruptly, but subtly. Attention would waver for a moment, and the space where a figure stood would be empty. Turning away and looking back revealed nothing but riverbank and frost-tinged grass. Sightings increased during the warmest months. Summer heat seemed to sharpen the contrast, making the cold more pronounced and the figures easier to see. At dawn and dusk, when temperature shifts were greatest, the bank appeared most occupied. Always the same arrangement. Always facing the water. Local accounts describe a shared sensation. Standing at Cold Hollow produces a deep, steady quiet. Thoughts slow. Sound feels distant. The cold seeps inward rather than resting on the skin. Some report a growing heaviness in the chest, not painful, but constricting. As if breath must be measured carefully. Despite this, the crossing draws people closer. There is a sense of waiting in the air, a feeling that something is about to happen if one remains still long enough. The figures seem to embody this anticipation, frozen in a posture of attention that never resolves. No one has reported the figures moving. They do not gesture or shift position. They do not step into the water or retreat from it. Readings confirm that Cold Hollow is consistently colder than surrounding land by several degrees. The effect remains stable across seasons and weather patterns. No underground springs or geological features have been identified to explain the localized cold. Photographs sometimes capture faint outlines along the bank. Dark shapes against lighter ground. These images lack detail and are often dismissed as shadows or distortions. Yet those who took the photos insist the shapes were clearly visible at the time. The crossing has no recorded mass tragedy. No single event explains the presence of the figures. There are no known floods or accidents tied to the site. Instead, the phenomenon appears cumulative, building slowly over generations of quiet passage and pause. Some believe the figures represent travelers who never crossed. That Cold Hollow interrupts journeys not by force, but by hesitation. The cold encourages stopping. The silence invites stillness. Those who linger too long become part of the waiting, fixed in place, facing the water they never entered. Not of people, but of moments. Instances when someone stood at the bank considering whether to cross. That uncertainty, repeated over time, shaped the space into something that now displays it visually. Visitors who stay too long often report lingering cold. Even after leaving the area, their breath remains visible for minutes. Hands feel stiff. Speech comes slower. The sensation fades gradually, but the memory of it remains vivid. At midday, the figures are harder to see. The cold persists, but the light washes out detail. Only at the edges of vision do shapes seem to form, disappearing when directly observed. The river continues its quiet flow, offering no reflection of those standing nearby. Cold Hollow Crossing remains accessible. There are no fences or warnings beyond local advice. The land appears calm, even inviting in its stillness. Yet the cold marks it clearly, drawing a line that does not shift or soften. Those who pass through quickly feel little effect. Those who stop, who watch the water and feel the air thicken around them, begin to notice the figures. And when the visitor finally turns away, breath clouding the air even in summer heat, the figures remain behind. Still. Silent. Watching the water flow past, holding the cold in place, and waiting for the next person who feels compelled to stop at Cold Hollow Crossing. The crossing at Split Channel lies where the river widens and thins at the same time, dividing into two shallow paths that run parallel for a short distance before merging again downstream. From a distance, the crossing appears simple. Stones break the surface. The water barely reaches the ankles. Many assume it is an easy decision, a brief pause on a longer journey. Up close, the hesitation begins. The ground near the crossing feels uneven in a way that does not match what the eye sees. Footing looks solid, yet balance feels uncertain. The water moves quietly, too quietly, slipping around rocks without sound. Even on clear days, the air above the split feels heavier, as if holding its breath. Travelers often stop longer than intended. Maps mark the crossing without comment. No warning signs. No barriers. Nothing to suggest that this shallow divide has unsettled people for generations. Yet those who arrive here rarely cross immediately. Something about the space encourages waiting, listening, reconsidering. The voices begin softly. At first, they are easy to mistake for wind moving through reeds or water slipping over stone. Then words emerge, shaped by tone rather than clarity. Raised voices. Sharp edges. Emotion carried without full meaning. Sound drifts from both sides of the split, echoing off the water's surface. As listening continues, the voices become clearer. They argue. One side accuses. The other defends. Each voice sounds urgent, strained, convinced of its own truth. The arguments feel personal, even when the words are indistinct. Listeners often report recognizing the cadence, the rhythm of conflict they have heard before. The pleas begin. Between accusations, voices break, calling for help. The tone shifts from anger to desperation, from certainty to fear. Each side insists it needs assistance now. Each claims the other is wrong, or dangerous, or beyond saving. Both sound sincere. Standing at the crossing, it becomes difficult to focus on anything else. The water, the path, the surroundings fade as attention narrows to the voices. They pull in opposite directions, demanding response, demanding choice. Choosing either side feels wrong, but not choosing feels worse. The voices do not pause. They repeat the same patterns, cycling through blame and begging without resolution. The longer one stands there, the harder it becomes to tell which side began the argument, or whether that even matters. Some attempt to cross quickly, hoping movement will break the effect. Stepping into the left channel intensifies the voice on that side. It grows louder, more detailed, while the opposing voice fades but does not disappear. Crossing toward the right produces the same result. The voice on that side sharpens. The other recedes, distant but persistent. In both cases, travelers describe an immediate surge of doubt. Thoughts race. Guilt surfaces without clear cause. The sense of having made the wrong decision settles heavily. Those who retreat to the center experience something else. Standing where the water divides, both voices return to equal volume. Accusations overlap. Pleas collide. The sound becomes chaotic, impossible to separate. Some describe feeling overwhelmed, frozen by the inability to act without causing harm. This paralysis has consequences. Search records note several incidents where travelers were found standing at the crossing for extended periods, disoriented and exhausted. Some spoke of trying to help but being unable to decide how. Local accounts suggest the crossing has always carried this effect. Long ago, the area was used as a meeting point between neighboring communities. Disputes were brought here for resolution, with each side standing across the water from the other. Agreements were attempted. Accusations aired. Apologies demanded. Not all conflicts ended cleanly. The river split around those moments, reflecting division in the land itself. The voices, locals say, are not new. They are echoes of decisions left unfinished, replaying in a place shaped by indecision. Researchers studying the crossing note unusual acoustic behavior. Sound carries evenly across both channels, regardless of wind direction. Voices spoken on one side arrive distorted on the other, stripped of context but rich in emotion. Recordings made simultaneously from both banks capture arguments that do not align perfectly, as if each side is hearing a slightly different version of the same exchange. This inconsistency deepens the confusion. Travelers listening carefully often believe they hear their own concerns reflected in the voices. Regrets. Old conflicts. Choices that still feel unresolved. The crossing seems to amplify internal tension, projecting it outward through sound. Many leave the crossing unsettled. Those who manage to cross quickly report relief once the voices fade, though the sense of discomfort lingers. Some avoid shallow crossings altogether afterward, preferring bridges or deeper water where choices feel clearer. A few return, drawn by the need to understand. They stand again at the divide, hoping to listen differently, to make sense of the arguments. None report finding clarity. The voices do not respond to questions. They do not change their cycle. They argue. They plead. They repeat. Authorities have considered altering the crossing. Proposals include redirecting the water, installing a single clear path, or building a bridge to remove the choice entirely. Each plan stalls. Funding disappears. Environmental concerns arise. The crossing remains unchanged. Locals believe it should stay that way. They say the crossing teaches a lesson without speaking directly. Not every call for help can be answered without consequence. Some divides exist not to be solved, but acknowledged. At dusk, the effect intensifies. As light fades, reflections blur the boundary between the two channels. The water darkens. The voices grow more insistent, overlapping more frequently. The urge to choose rises alongside the fear of choosing incorrectly. Most travelers avoid the crossing at night. Those who pass through do so quickly, eyes forward, ears tuned away from the water. They describe the relief of leaving the split behind, of returning to a path that moves in one direction only. By morning, the crossing looks harmless again. Sunlight reveals shallow water and smooth stones. Birds move freely between banks. The river flows without complaint. There is no visible sign of the arguments that filled the space hours before. Yet the voices return whenever someone stops long enough to listen. Accusing. Begging. Pulling in opposite directions. The crossing at Split Channel does not block passage. It does not trap travelers or force a decision. It simply presents a moment where choice feels heavy and neutrality feels impossible. Those who cross quickly may never notice. Those who linger learn why choosing either side feels wrong. And why walking away without choosing feels just as difficult. The river divides. The voices argue. And the crossing waits. Offering no answers. Only the uneasy truth that some paths cannot be resolved by stepping to one side or the other. Red Creek Crossing lies where the road dips low and cuts through a wide stretch of open land. During the day, it appears unremarkable, a simple passage over dry earth that shows no sign of danger. The creek itself runs shallow most of the year, its red-tinted soil giving the place its name. Travelers pass without slowing, unaware of what once happened there. Long ago, Red Creek Crossing was part of a major livestock route. Herds were driven through the area regularly, guided by riders who knew the land and trusted its openness. The crossing was wide enough to move animals efficiently, and the creek provided a brief rest before continuing onward. For years, the system worked without incident. Until one night, it did not. A sudden storm moved in faster than expected, carrying thunder and sharp wind that rolled across the plains. Lightning split the sky, startling the herd as it approached the crossing. The riders tried to regain control, but panic spread quickly through the animals. The stampede began without warning. Hooves struck the ground in unison, hundreds of animals surging forward at once. Dust filled the air. The sound was overwhelming, a continuous roar that drowned out shouts and signals. The narrow dip at the crossing funneled the herd tighter, increasing speed and pressure. Those caught in the path had no chance to escape. By the time the storm passed, the land was torn apart. The herd scattered miles away, leaving silence and destruction behind. The crossing was abandoned for a time after that. Repairs were made eventually, but the route never regained its former importance. New paths were chosen. Red Creek Crossing became just another quiet stretch of road, its history fading into local memory. Then people began hearing the hoofbeats. The first reports came from drivers traveling late at night. They described a sudden rumble beneath their vehicles, as if something large was approaching fast. At first, it sounded distant, a low vibration felt more than heard. Then it grew louder. Hoofbeats thundered across the road, rapid and chaotic, coming from both sides at once. Drivers instinctively braked. Some pulled to the side, gripping the wheel as dust rose around their headlights. The air filled with movement and noise, powerful enough to make the ground tremble beneath tires. Then everything went silent. No animals appeared. No shapes crossed the road. The dust settled quickly, revealing empty land under the glow of headlights. The creek lay still. The night returned to calm as if nothing had happened. The phenomenon repeated. Always at night. Always without warning. Hoofbeats would surge across the crossing. Last only seconds. Then vanish completely. No tracks were left behind. No dust lingered long enough to explain itself. Those who experienced it shared the same details. The sound came from multiple directions. It felt close, immediate, and unavoidable. Local authorities investigated. They found no seismic activity, no wildlife movement, and no mechanical explanation. Cameras installed near the crossing recorded nothing unusual, capturing only still road and empty fields even as drivers reported intense noise. The timing followed a pattern. The hoofbeats occurred most often on stormless nights, when the air was still and the land quiet. Heavy rain or strong wind prevented sightings entirely. The phenomenon seemed to require calm conditions, as though silence allowed it to surface. Elders spoke of the stampede in hushed tones. They said the land never forgot that night. That the fear and momentum of the herd were pressed into the soil itself, trapped in the red earth beneath the crossing. When conditions were right, the memory released itself in sound and motion. Some believe the dust is key. Witnesses often reported seeing clouds rise briefly, illuminated by headlights before disappearing. The dust behaved unnaturally, lifting without wind and settling almost instantly, leaving no trace behind. Others believe the crossing itself amplifies memory. The dip in the road, the curve of the creek, and the openness of the land combine to focus sound in unusual ways. Yet no natural explanation accounts for the precision and intensity of the hoofbeats. No one has ever been struck at Red Creek Crossing. The stampede does not collide with the living. It does not block the road. It simply passes through, repeating a moment of uncontrolled movement before vanishing. It vanishes. Drivers who experience it often stop afterward, sitting in silence, listening for anything else. Nothing follows. No distant echoes. No lingering vibration. Just the quiet hum of night insects and the slow return of normal sound. Some drivers avoid the crossing after dark. Others seek it out, curious to witness the event for themselves. Most leave unsettled, unsure whether what they heard was real or imagined, yet unable to dismiss the shared consistency of the experience. By daylight, Red Creek Crossing offers no clues. The road is smooth. The soil undisturbed. The creek shallow and calm. There are no signs of mass movement, no damage to explain the chaos heard hours earlier. Yet the land feels different. Standing there quietly, some report a sense of anticipation, as if something waits just beneath the surface. The air feels charged, holding tension that never fully dissipates. At night, that tension releases. Hoofbeats thunder across the road without warning. Dust rises in swirling clouds. The sound surges forward, unstoppable and overwhelming. Then everything goes silent again. Red Creek Crossing remains open, unmarked, and unchanged on maps. It does not announce its history or warn those who pass through. It simply repeats what once happened, again and again, bound to a moment when fear outran control. The stampede never arrives. It never leaves. It only crosses, racing through the darkness. Reminding anyone who hears it that some events move too fast to stop, and some places remember the sound of what could not be saved. Lantern Ford was once a quiet but essential crossing. A shallow stretch of river where the road dipped gently and rose again on the far bank. During the day, it looked unremarkable, marked only by worn stones beneath the water. At night, it became something else entirely. Travelers relied on it after sunset. Before bridges and wide roads reached this region, lanterns were carried low, close to the water. Their glow revealing ripples and shallow paths. The ford earned its name from those lights. Small flames hovered just above the surface as travelers crossed, bobbing gently with each step. From a distance, the sight was reassuring. A line of lights meant others had passed safely. Night travel was common here. People moved in groups when possible, sharing light and direction. The river flowed steadily but calmly, its sound blending with insects and wind. The ford felt dependable, a brief challenge rather than a danger. That trust did not last. Accidents happened quietly, without spectacle. A horse lost footing during high water. A wagon drifted slightly off course. Most incidents ended with soaked clothes and shaken nerves. Some ended with loss. Records mentioned delays and disappearances without detail. Names were written down. Journeys were marked unfinished. The river kept moving, unchanged by what it carried away. Over time, new routes were built. And Lantern Ford fell out of regular use. The road remains. Grass has grown along its edges, and the ruts have softened with age, but the dip toward the water is still visible. By day, the ford looks peaceful, almost inviting. At night, the lights return. They appear just above the water, small and steady, glowing softly without visible source. They do not flicker like flame. They hover, spaced irregularly, drifting slowly with no regard for current or wind. Witnesses often notice them from a distance. At first, the lights seem far out over the river, barely brighter than stars reflected on the surface. As minutes pass, they drift closer to the near bank, maintaining a height just above the water, as if following an invisible path. The movement is unhurried. Each light glides forward with gentle intent, never colliding, never merging. They do not form a straight line, but they feel coordinated, like travelers approaching a familiar crossing. Those who step closer feel a pull to watch. The lights draw attention without urgency. They feel calm, almost patient. Standing near the ford during these moments creates a sense of quiet focus, as if the surrounding world fades slightly at the edges. Then the lights vanish. They do not dim or drift away. They disappear instantly, leaving only dark water and the sound of the river. The sudden absence often startles those watching, breaking the calm and replacing it with uncertainty. No disturbance follows. The water's surface remains smooth. No ripples spread. No heat or smoke lingers. It is as if the lights were never there at all. The phenomenon repeats without pattern. Some nights pass quietly. On others, the lights appear multiple times, always following the same slow approach before vanishing. They never cross the ford fully. They never reach the bank. Attempts to follow them fail. Walking along the river does not bring the observer closer. The lights maintain distance until they disappear. Boats launched at night find nothing but empty water where the glow was moments before. Audio recordings capture only the river. They recognize the nights when the air feels heavier near the ford, when the river seems darker than usual. On those nights, they avoid the crossing, choosing longer routes or waiting until morning. Stories are shared carefully. They speak of travelers who followed the lights too closely, stepping toward the water without realizing it. Others mention moments of confusion, when the ford felt longer than it should be, the far bank farther away than memory allowed. No one claims the lights are hostile. They do not rush. They do not surround or threaten. They approach, pause, and vanish, repeating a motion that feels practiced rather than curious. Some believe the lights are habit made visible. They suggest the crossing remembers the countless lanterns that once guided people safely through the dark. Others believe the lights mark paths that no longer exist, retracing routes taken so often they left an impression. Scientists cite optical effects, reflections, and atmospheric conditions, but none can explain the consistency of movement or the way the lights maintain height above the water. The river offers no clues. Lantern Ford remains quiet by day. Birds move along the banks. Sunlight breaks across the stones. The crossing looks harmless, almost forgotten. Only the worn track hints at its former importance. At night, the ford waits. Those who pass nearby sometimes stop without intending to, drawn by a subtle change in the air. When the lights appear, hovering just above the river, the scene feels briefly complete, as if something old has resumed its place. Then the lights drift closer. They hold their course. And just before they should arrive, they vanish, leaving the river unchanged and the watcher standing alone. And still repeats their passage, light by light, without ever allowing it to finish. Lies where a wide, slow river spreads across flat grassland before narrowing again downstream. The land there is open and quiet, shaped by seasonal flooding and long stretches of stillness. From a distance, the crossing looks ordinary. A simple road dips toward the water, passes through it, and rises again on the opposite bank. For decades, people used it without concern. Farmers crossed daily. Delivery trucks rolled through at low speed. The water was shallow enough to see the gravel beneath, and the current appeared gentle, almost lazy. The crossing became part of routine, trusted because it had always been there. Then the measurements began to change. Survey markers placed near the road showed subtle shifts from year to year. The surface of the crossing sank slightly lower each season, settling deeper into the riverbed. At first, the change was barely noticeable, measured in inches that most people dismissed as erosion or poor maintenance. But the sinking never stopped. Each year, the water covered more of the road. The gravel disappeared beneath silt. The banks softened and slumped inward. Repairs were made repeatedly, adding layers of fill and reinforcement, yet the crossing continued to descend, as if the land beneath it refused to hold. Drivers began reporting a strange sensation. As vehicles approached the water, steering felt heavier. Braking required more pressure. Some described a gentle forward pull, subtle but persistent. As if the road sloped more steeply than it appeared. The sensation intensified at the center of the crossing, where the water was deepest. Engines remained functional. There was no mechanical failure to explain the feeling. Tires gripped normally. Yet drivers felt compelled to maintain speed, even when they intended to slow. Those who stopped in the middle described an uneasy pressure, as if something beneath the vehicle resisted stillness. In these cases, drivers reported the same sequence. The engine cut out without warning. The vehicle rocked slightly, not side to side, but forward, as if nudged. Restarting the engine often succeeded. But the sense of urgency remained until the vehicle cleared the water. No accidents occurred at first. The experiences were unsettling but brief. Most drivers dismissed them once back on dry ground. The crossing remained open, though warning signs advised caution during high water. Then a truck was lost. After heavy rain, a delivery vehicle entered the crossing and failed to emerge. The driver slowed, then stopped near the center. There was no sudden drop, no visible collapse. The vehicle simply settled lower, water rising around the doors as if the riverbed had softened beneath it. The driver escaped unharmed. The truck did not. Recovery crews found it partially submerged, angled slightly forward, as though pulled into place. The road surface beneath had compacted dramatically, creating a shallow depression that had not been present days earlier. From that point on, concern grew. Engineers examined the site, testing soil stability and water flow. Results showed unusually fine sediment beneath the crossing, capable of shifting under sustained pressure. Yet the rate of sinking exceeded expectations. The river appeared to draw material inward, not wash it away. Local drivers shared similar stories. The forward pull was consistent. It did not feel like sliding or sinking, but like being guided. Some described it as a steady invitation to continue moving, discouraging hesitation. The feeling disappeared the moment the far bank was reached. Pedestrians felt it too. Those who walked the crossing reported subtle resistance when attempting to turn back midstream. Steps toward the opposite bank felt easier than steps back toward the entrance. The crossing continued to sink. Each repair brought only temporary stability. Markers showed the road surface lowering year after year, as if the river was slowly reclaiming the path. During dry seasons, the effect was less pronounced, but never absent. Local belief shifted toward the idea of acceptance. That the river had learned the presence of the road and responded over time, reshaping itself to remove the interruption. The pull felt by drivers was interpreted not as aggression, but as alignment, a gentle insistence that movement continue in one direction. Others spoke of pressure. Standing at the center of the crossing created a sensation of weight below, as if the water carried more mass than it should. The river surface looked calm, but beneath it felt dense and focused. No sounds accompanied the effect. There was no suction, no roar of current. The river remained quiet, reflecting sky and grass alike. Its stillness made the sensation more difficult to understand, and harder to resist. Authorities eventually restricted access. Barriers were placed during periods of high water. Alternate routes were recommended. Still, some drivers ignored the warnings, drawn by convenience or curiosity. Most crossed without incident, but all reported the same subtle pull. The sinking did not accelerate. It remained steady, predictable in its slowness. Each year, a little more depth. Each season, a little more water over the road. The road disappears beneath a thin sheet of reflected light. Birds move along the banks. Nothing about the scene suggests danger or movement. But those who have crossed know better. They remember the way the vehicle felt slightly out of balance. The way stopping felt wrong. The quiet insistence to keep moving forward, to let the crossing carry them through without pause. Low prairie crossing does not trap or rush. It does not surge or swallow suddenly. It simply lowers itself year by year, inviting the river to rise in response. The pull drivers feel is not violent, but persuasive, guiding motion along a path that becomes less solid with time. The crossing remains open for now. It still connects both banks. It still supports passage. But each year, the water claims a little more of it. And the road yields without protest. To maintain steady movement. To trust that once across, the pull will release them. And to remember that some crossings are not meant to stay fixed forever. Especially when the land beneath them is slowly, quietly choosing to let go. At Old Fence Ford, the land dips gently toward a shallow crossing where the river spreads thin and slow. Water slips over smooth stones, clear enough to reveal the bottom even after rain. Along the bank, broken fence posts lean at uneven angles, their tops splintered, their wire long gone. They form a crooked line that once marked a boundary, though no one remembers exactly what it divided. The ford looks harmless in daylight. Tall grass sways along the banks, bending with the breeze. The water barely reaches the knees. Tracks from animals and hikers crisscross the mud, suggesting regular use. Yet something about the place encourages caution. People tend to pause before stepping in, scanning the area as if expecting movement that never comes. The whispers begin quietly. At first, they blend with natural sound. Wind moving through grass. Water brushing against stone. A faint rustle that could be anything. Only when one stands still does the difference become clear. The sound has shape. Direction. Purpose. Voices rise from the grass near the fence posts. They are low and close, spoken just above a breath. Not loud enough to startle, but clear enough to understand. Warnings. Suggestions to turn back. Gentle instructions offered with urgency rather than command. Travelers often look around, expecting to see someone nearby. There is never anyone there. The whispers do not come from a single spot. They move subtly, shifting position as the listener turns. Sometimes they seem to follow along the line of the broken fence. Other times they drift closer to the water's edge. Always staying just out of sight. Most people listen. Turning back brings immediate relief. The whispers fade. The air feels lighter. Muscles relax. The ford loses its tension. Returning to an ordinary stretch of river. That no longer demands attention. Those who ignore the voices describe a different experience. Stepping into the water does not silence the whispers. They continue, softer now, as if disappointed rather than insistent. With each step forward, a heaviness settles in the chest. Breathing becomes shallow. Thoughts narrow, focusing on unease rather than direction. The sense of dread arrives gradually. It does not strike like fear. It builds, layer by layer, tightening around the body with calm persistence. The ford seems to stretch longer than expected. The opposite bank feels farther away, even though it remains clearly visible. Sounds dull. The river quiets. Grass stills. Even footsteps lose their clarity, as if the ground is absorbing them. The whispers continue from behind, repeating their warnings, now tinged with concern rather than instruction. Those who push on report physical sensations that are difficult to describe. A pressure at the back of the neck. A coldness along the spine. The feeling of being watched, not from above or behind, but from the ground itself. The dread becomes so strong that standing still feels unbearable, yet moving forward feels worse. Many turn back before reaching the center of the ford. The moment they do, the sensation lifts. Breath deepens. The whispers soften, then vanish entirely. Crossing back to the original bank feels easier, shorter, as if distance itself has shifted to encourage retreat. A few continue all the way across. Those who reach the far side describe lingering effects. The dread does not disappear immediately. It follows them for hours, sometimes days. Some return to Old Fence Ford, convinced they need to understand what happened. They stand again near the broken posts. The whispers resume, unchanged, offering the same warning. These visitors often leave quickly, unsettled by how familiar the voices feel, as if they recognize not just the place, but the person listening. Local history offers fragments but no full explanation. Records mention an old boundary fence that once marked contested land. Disputes over access to the crossing lasted generations. Arguments ended in decisions that favored some and excluded others. Over time, the fence fell into disrepair, but the tension remained embedded in the place. Older residents say the ford remembers hesitation. They believe the whispers belonged to moments when people turned back, chose safety, or avoided crossing when the cost felt too high. According to this belief, the land learned to speak caution, shaped by countless decisions to retreat rather than risk what lay beyond. Researchers studying the area have noted unusual acoustic behavior. Sound travels unevenly near the ford, carried low through grass and water. Frequencies that typically fade quickly linger here, creating the impression of proximity even when sources are distant. Still, this does not explain the clarity of the words or the consistency of the message. No recordings capture the whispers fully. Audio devices pick up faint murmurs, often drowned out by ambient noise during playback. Witnesses insist the voices were clear in person, distinct enough to understand, impossible to mistake for random sound. The advice is given without fear, more like instruction passed down through habit than panic. Most heed it. Those who dismiss the warnings often learn quickly why they exist. The dread does not escalate into danger. Nothing chases or blocks the crossing. The place does not punish. It persuades. Old Fence Ford does not force travelers to turn back. It simply makes continuing feel deeply wrong. As if every instinct is being quietly contradicted. The whispers do not threaten. They do not demand. They suggest, repeatedly, that leaving is the wiser choice. At dusk, the effect strengthens. As light fades, the broken posts cast long shadows across the grass. The river darkens. The whispers become more frequent, overlapping slightly, as if more voices have joined the warning. Standing there feels like standing at the edge of a thought better left unfinished. Few stay after sunset. Those who do often leave shaken, unable to explain why the crossing affected them so strongly. They speak of the place with caution, avoiding direct paths that would take them near it again. By morning, Old Fence Ford looks unchanged. Water flows gently. Grass bends in the breeze. The fence posts lean as they always have, silent and unmoving. There is no sign of the whispers or the dread they bring. Yet anyone who has stood there knows. The ford does not need to block the way or raise barriers. It relies on something more subtle. A quiet voice rising from the grass. A feeling that grows heavier with every ignored warning. Old fence ford waits patiently, offering the chance to turn back. Those who listen leave safely. Those who do not carry the memory of dread with them. Long after the river and broken posts have disappeared behind them. Knowing that some crossings are marked not by danger ahead, but by the quiet insistence that now is not the time to go any farther. Miller Run crossing lay at a shallow bend in the river where the water narrowed before widening again downstream. For years, it served as a convenient passage, used by farmers, travelers, and delivery trucks moving between rural communities. During calm weather, the crossing appeared harmless, the water barely reaching the tops of boots and flowing with gentle confidence. The danger hid beneath the surface. The riverbed dropped sharply just beyond the visible ford, creating sudden pull where the current accelerated without warning. After heavy rain upstream, water surged through Miller Run faster than expected, changing depth and speed in minutes. Those unfamiliar with its behavior often misjudged the crossing. The first drowning was considered an accident. A driver attempted to cross during a mild rise in water level, confident the depth was manageable. The vehicle stalled midstream, wheels losing traction as the current pressed against its side. By the time help arrived, the river had already claimed its victim. Warnings were placed soon after. Signs advised caution. Locals shared stories. Still, people continued to cross, trusting experience or dismissing the danger as exaggerated. Over the years, more incidents followed. Some occurred during storms. Others happened on clear days when the river looked calm. The river took without hesitation. Eventually, Miller Run crossing was officially abandoned. Barriers blocked vehicle access. Detours were marked. Maps were updated. The crossing became a place to avoid, not a shortcut to rely on. That should have been the end of it. But the river did not return to silence. Not long after the final closure, residents began noticing something strange on the nearby roads. Wet footprints appeared where they should not have been. On dry pavement, far from the riverbank, faint impressions formed overnight. They appeared in pairs, evenly spaced, shaped like bare feet or soaked shoes. Water pooled briefly within them before evaporating, leaving darkened marks that faded slowly under the sun. At first, people blamed runoff or pranksters. But the pattern continued. The footprints appeared on different roads, always starting near Miller Run and moving outward. They crossed intersections. They followed sidewalks. They stopped abruptly in places where there was no shelter, no doorway, and no explanation. No tracks ever led back to the river. Residents reported finding the prints early in the morning, when the roads were still dry and undisturbed. By midday, the marks were gone, leaving no evidence behind beyond uneasy memory. The phenomenon drew attention. Local authorities investigated, searching for leaks, drainage issues, or signs of trespassing. Nothing accounted for the precise placement or the direction of the prints. Surveillance cameras captured empty streets where footprints appeared minutes later. Witnesses described the same detail. The footprints always looked fresh, as if made moments before discovery. Water beaded on the surface briefly, then soaked in. The ground around them remained dry, untouched by rain or moisture. Some noticed something else. The prints never overlapped. They never crossed one another. Each trail followed a single path, moving steadily away from the river as though the person who made them knew exactly where they were going. Those who followed the trails felt uneasy. Walking alongside the footprints produced a strange sensation, a heaviness in the air and a faint smell of river water that lingered even far from the bank. Some reported hearing soft dripping sounds, though nothing visible was wet nearby. The footprints always ended suddenly. Sometimes they stopped in the middle of a road. Other times they faded near fields or tree lines. There were no signs of entry or exit, no indication of where the maker of the prints had gone. The river itself changed after the closure. Water levels remained unpredictable, rising and falling without clear cause. The surface often looked darker near the crossing, reflecting less light than surrounding sections. Standing near the bank at dusk produced an unsettling quiet, as though sound was being absorbed. Fishermen stopped visiting the area. Those who tried reported equipment going missing, pulled quietly from the bank. Some felt sudden tugs at their boots when standing too close to the water, gentle but persistent, urging movement back toward the river. No new drownings occurred. The river did not take anyone else after the crossing was abandoned. Instead, it left behind signs of movement moving away from it, as if something that once belonged to the water was now walking on land. Elders shared their thoughts carefully. They believed the river was releasing what it had taken, not in form, but in memory. The footprints, they said, were not warnings or threats. They were traces of unfinished motion, people who had never fully left the crossing. Paths home. Roads toward safety. Journeys interrupted before they could begin. The footprints never appeared during heavy rain. They formed only on dry nights, when the river was calm and the world quiet. Moonlight often coincided with their appearance, reflecting softly off the water before the prints emerged beyond the bank. Shadows near the river shifted briefly. Water rippled without wind. Then stillness returned, followed by fresh footprints on nearby ground. No one has ever seen the prints form. They appear only when no one is watching, leaving evidence without witness. By the time someone notices them, the moment has already passed. Today, Miller Run Crossing remains blocked and silent. The barriers stand firm. The detour signs are faded but visible. The river continues to flow beneath the abandoned crossing, indifferent to warning signs and closures. Yet the roads nearby tell a different story. Wet footprints still appear from time to time, leading away from the river in careful, deliberate lines. They never turn back. And by the time daylight comes, the road is dry again. The river calm. And the only thing left behind is the unsettling sense that some crossings do not end at the water's edge. And some journeys continue long after the river has already taken its toll. And some journeys continue long after the river has already taken its toll. Fog Water Crossing lies along a low stretch of road where the land sinks gently toward a wide, slow-moving river. Under clear skies, the crossing is simple and unremarkable, marked by guardrails and warning signs that most drivers pass without a second thought. The water moves calmly beneath, reflecting clouds and trees with quiet patience. In heavy mist, Fog Water Crossing disappears. Fog rolls in from the river without warning, thick and close to the ground. Locals know to avoid it when the fog is heavy. They speak of visibility dropping to nothing, of the river seeming closer than it should be. Most turn back when the mist thickens. Some do not. Those who enter Fog Water Crossing during fog report the same unsettling experience. At first, the drive feels slow and cautious, tires humming softly over damp pavement. The fog presses in from all sides, muting the outside world. Then movement appears at the edge of the headlights. They emerge from the fog without sound, keeping perfect pace with the vehicle. They do not stumble or lag behind, even when the car slows. Their forms are human in outline but blurred by mist, faces indistinct, features softened as if unfinished. They do not wave or gesture. Their arms hang naturally at their sides. Their heads remain forward, matching the direction of travel. They walk close enough to be seen clearly, yet never close enough to touch. No footsteps are heard, even on gravel or wet ground. Drivers instinctively glance toward the figures, then back to the road. Looking away for even a moment causes the shapes to fade slightly, blending into the fog. Looking back brings them into focus again, still there, still walking, still silent. The figures do not respond to attention. Horn blasts, flashing lights, or shouting produce no reaction. The walkers neither turn nor accelerate. They simply continue forward, as steady as the motion of the vehicle beside them. Some drivers attempt to stop. When brakes are applied, the car slows, but the figures do not. They continue walking forward, passing beyond the headlights and dissolving into fog ahead. When the vehicle resumes movement, new figures appear at the sides once more, matching pace again. The sensation is deeply unsettling. Drivers describe a growing tension in the chest, a feeling of being accompanied without consent. Time feels distorted, as though the crossing lasts longer than it should. The fog seems thicker near the figures, heavier, resistant to light. Crossing the river brings sudden change. The moment the vehicle reaches the far side, the figures vanish completely. The fog thins just enough to reveal empty road and silent guardrails. The air feels lighter, easier to breathe. The crossing feels finished, though the experience lingers. Those who look back see nothing. No footprints. No movement. No shapes trailing behind. The fog closes in once more, hiding the crossing as if it were never there. Long before modern vehicles, travelers on foot and horseback described similar encounters. They spoke of companions who appeared during fog, walking beside them across the crossing, never speaking, never acknowledging presence. These accounts were dismissed as fatigue or imagination. The reports never stopped. Modern drivers, unfamiliar with the old stories, describe the same details. The same silent figures. The same steady pace. The same disappearance once the crossing ends. Authorities have investigated without success. Traffic cameras fail during heavy fog, capturing only blank white frames. Road sensors detect no additional weight or movement beside vehicles. No physical explanation accounts for the consistency of the sightings. Weather experts note the fog at Fogwater Crossing behaves unusually. It forms quickly and clings tightly to the surface of the water and road. Wind does not disperse it easily. Sound carries poorly within it, as if absorbed before traveling far. Local residents share theories quietly. Some believe the figures are echoes of those who once crossed on foot, guided by nothing but memory and instinct. Others suggest the fog reveals something normally hidden, briefly aligning different moments in the same space. No one claims the figures are aggressive. They never touch vehicles. They never block the road. Their presence feels observant rather than threatening. Yet the discomfort they cause is undeniable. Those who experience the crossing once often avoid it afterward. They choose longer routes or wait for clear weather. Even those who dismiss the experience as illusion admit feeling uneasy when fog gathers near the river. A few drivers report something more troubling. They say the figures appear familiar, not as specific people, but in posture and movement. These drivers leave the crossing shaken, unable to explain why the memory feels personal. The figures never appear in clear weather. Only when fog is thick enough to erase the horizon do they emerge. As soon as visibility improves, the crossing returns to normal, indistinguishable from any other stretch of road. Fogwater Crossing remains open. Signs warn of reduced visibility and slick conditions, but nothing more. There are no official notices about figures or disappearances. The road exists as it always has, reliable and ordinary under the sun. In heavy mist, it becomes something else. Those who drive through slowly, gripping the wheel and watching the edges of their headlights, may notice movement keeping pace beside them. Silent shapes walking calmly through fog, neither guiding nor hindering, simply accompanying. They do not follow beyond the crossing. They do not turn back. They vanish the moment the road rises away from the water, leaving drivers alone with the sound of their engine and the memory of footsteps that made no sound at all. Deep silt road cuts through a low stretch of floodplain where the river slows and spreads wide. A shallow stretch of water passes over packed earth and gravel, darkened by layers of fine sediment. From the bank, it appears no more dangerous than dozens of similar crossings scattered across the region. Locals know better. The road earned its reputation gradually, through stalled vehicles and long nights waiting for help. Engines would cut out without warning the moment tires reached the deepest section. Dash lights stayed on. Fuel levels were normal. Yet the engine simply stopped, as if something below the surface decided it should. At first, mechanics blamed moisture and poor maintenance. Drivers were advised to approach slowly, to keep momentum steady, to avoid stopping in the water. For a while, that advice seemed effective. Then the incidents became more frequent, and harder to explain. Vehicles began stalling even in dry weather. The crossing did not flood dramatically. The water remained low, barely reaching the wheel hubs. Still, engines failed at the same point, near the center where the silt was thickest. Restart attempts often succeeded briefly, only to fail again seconds later. Drivers trapped mid-crossing reported a strange quiet. The usual sounds of water and wind seemed muted. Standing outside the vehicle, they noticed the surface of the river was unnaturally smooth, disturbed only by their own movements. The air felt heavy, as if sound itself was being absorbed. Then came the breathing. It was faint at first, easy to mistake for water shifting through mud. A slow, rhythmic sound rising from beneath the surface. Inhale. Exhale. The cadence was unmistakable, too steady to be current or bubbles escaping trapped air. Those who heard it described the same reaction. A sudden tension in the chest. A feeling of being watched from below. The instinct to get out of the water immediately, even if it meant abandoning the vehicle. Some stayed long enough to listen more closely. They reported that the sound grew clearer when movement stopped. When the engine died and the water settled, the breathing became easier to hear. When someone stepped away from the vehicle, the sound followed, always centered beneath the deepest silt. Recovery crews noted something unusual. Vehicles stuck at deep silt road were harder to extract than expected. Tires sank deeper the longer they remained. The ground beneath compacted around them, forming a tight grip that resisted towing. Once removed, the ruts left behind filled slowly, smoothing themselves out as if the silt was resetting. The problem was localized to the crossing itself, confined to a short stretch where the riverbed widened and the sediment lay thick. Soil tests confirmed unusually fine particles, capable of shifting and sealing quickly under pressure. Audio recordings captured faint rhythmic sounds on several occasions. Playback confirmed what witnesses described, a low, steady pattern that did not match any known environmental source. Some drivers felt vibrations through the floor. Not shaking, but a subtle pulsing sensation, as if something beneath the vehicle adjusted position slowly. The sensation stopped once the vehicle was free of the water. A few incidents ended differently. In rare cases, drivers reported hearing the breathing before the engine stalled. Those who immediately reversed and left the crossing avoided becoming stuck. They described a strong urge to continue forward that had to be consciously resisted. Local belief shifted toward caution rather than explanation. Deep Silt Road became a place people avoided at night or alone. Warning signs were posted, but they did little to capture the nature of the risk. The crossing did not look dangerous. It felt dangerous only once entered. Some believe the riverbed is alive with movement. Not in the sense of creatures, but in the way fine silt behaves under pressure. The breathing, they say, is the sound of trapped air moving through layers that shift and compress, creating a rhythm that mimics life. Others are not convinced. They point out the timing, the way the sound appears only when vehicles stop, the way it seems to respond to presence. Drivers who remain too long often describe lingering unease. Even after leaving, the sound seems to echo faintly in memory. Sleep that night is restless. Dreams feature heavy ground and slow movement, as if something beneath waits patiently. At dawn, deep silt road appears unchanged. The water lies flat and dark. The crossing looks solid. Tire tracks from the night before lead into the water and out again, as if nothing unusual occurred. Only deeper ruts mark where vehicles were trapped. Authorities considered closing the crossing permanently. So far, they have not. The road remains useful, and incidents, while unsettling, rarely result in injury. Still, most locals choose longer routes when possible, preferring inconvenience over uncertainty. Those who must cross are advised to maintain steady speed. Do not stop. Do not linger. If the engine falters, reverse immediately. Do not step into the water to investigate sounds. The crossing does not trap aggressively. The silt shifts slowly, responding to weight and stillness. The breathing does not rush or escalate. It remains calm, patient, as if accustomed to vehicles pausing above it. Deep silt road remains part of the landscape, quiet and unassuming. It does not roar or surge. It does not collapse without warning. It simply behaves differently than expected, turning stillness into risk and movement into escape. Those who have crossed safely remember the moment clearly. The instant when the engine hesitated. The air grew quiet. The water seemed to hold its breath. And beneath the surface, something else continued breathing, steady and slow, waiting for the vehicle above to decide whether it would stay or leave. Twin Willow Crossing lies where a narrow stream bends gently through low ground. Shallow enough to wade but wide enough to reflect the sky. Two willow trees stand on opposite banks, their trunks scarred and split from lightning strikes that occurred years apart. Each strike left the trees alive but altered, their bark darkened and twisted, their branches growing unevenly as if shaped by memory rather than light. The crossing takes its name from them. During the day, the place feels quiet and exposed. Sunlight filters through hanging leaves, scattering reflections across the water. The willows creak softly, their branches brushing the surface as if testing it. The ground is worn smooth by generations of travelers who crossed here when the water was low. At night, everything changes. Darkness settles quickly at Twin Willow Crossing. The trees block moonlight, casting long, tangled shadows across the water and the banks. The stream grows darker than it should, absorbing reflection instead of returning it. Sound behaves strangely, with even small movements carrying farther than expected. It is then that the figures appear. They emerge first as distortions, places where shadow deepens and shifts without cause. At a glance, they resemble the trunks themselves, vertical and still. Only when watched carefully do they begin to move. They slip between the two willows, passing from one side of the crossing to the other without sound. They stretch and narrow as they move, changing shape subtly, as if constrained by the space they occupy. Their edges blur and reform, never fully solid, never fully absent. They do not cross the water. Each time a figure reaches the edge of the stream, it stops. The shadow thins, hesitates, then turns back toward the bank it came from. Some retrace their path immediately. Others linger at the edge, shifting slightly, as if considering a boundary they cannot pass. The water remains undisturbed. No ripples form. No reflections break. The stream holds perfectly still beneath the movement of shadow above it, as though the figures have no weight there, or are forbidden from touching it. Witnesses describe the movement as deliberate but restrained. The figures do not rush. They do not chase. They follow a narrow corridor between the two trees, pacing back and forth in a pattern that never quite repeats. Sometimes only one appears. Other nights, several move at once, their shapes overlapping briefly before separating again. They never step beyond the willows. Those who stand near the crossing at night report a strong sense of separation. The feeling of being on one side of something that should not be crossed, even though the water is shallow and calm. Standing at the edge produces a subtle tension, a sense of pressure behind the eyes and across the chest. Crossing during these moments feels wrong. The willows themselves seem to mark a threshold. Their lightning scars catch faint light, glowing slightly in the dark. The damaged wood stands out against the surrounding bark, pale and exposed, as if the trees were split open and never fully healed. Local stories say the lightning strikes were not accidents. According to older accounts, the first strike came during a violent storm when several people attempted to cross the stream at night. The second followed years later, during another storm, after a similar incident. Details are vague, passed down through implication rather than record. What remains consistent is the belief that the willows were marked intentionally. Some say the strikes anchored something to the place. Others believe the trees were changed in a way that made them guardians rather than victims. Whatever the cause, the behavior of the shadows began after the second strike, and has continued ever since. Researchers who visited the site documented unusual light behavior. Infrared cameras show areas of shifting darkness between the trees, though no heat signatures are detected. Motion sensors trigger intermittently without visible cause. Footage often contains brief gaps, frames where the image distorts before returning to normal. Those who witness them say cameras fail to capture what the eye sees. The shadows appear flatter on screen, less defined, as if the medium cannot hold their shape. Audio recordings reveal only ambient sound, with no indication of movement. People who linger too long near the crossing report lingering effects. A sense of being watched follows them for hours afterward. Reflections in windows feel delayed. Shadows at the edge of vision seem slightly out of sync. These sensations fade with time, but the memory of the crossing remains vivid. Children in nearby towns are warned not to play near the willows after dark. The warning is given calmly, without dramatic explanation. Parents say the crossing is not dangerous, but it is not meant for wandering. The water may be shallow, but the space between the trees belongs to something else. No one recalls the figures ever crossing the stream. Even during floods, when the water rises and the banks blur, the shadows stop at the same invisible line. Some believe the figures are reflections of people who once crossed at the wrong time, caught between choices, unable to move forward or back. Others think they are something older, tied to the land long before the willows were struck, now constrained by whatever changed that night. The figures never acknowledge observers. They do not turn their heads. They do not react to movement or sound. Their pacing continues regardless of who is watching, as if repeating a task that cannot be finished. At dawn, they fade. As light returns, the shadows thin and dissolve into the ordinary darkness beneath the trees. The crossing looks harmless again. The stream reflects the sky. The willows sway gently, their scars visible but quiet. By day, Twin Willow Crossing is just a place. By night, it becomes something else. Travelers who pass through after sunset do so quickly, avoiding stopping between the trees. They cross upstream or downstream instead, unwilling to step into the narrow space where shadows move without touching water. Twin Willow Crossing does not block passage with force or fear. It simply holds a line. Between two lightning-marked trees, something moves back and forth, bound to the space it was given, never crossing the water, never leaving, waiting in the dark where land and river almost meet, but never quite do. Broken Plank Ford lies at a quiet bend in the river where the water spreads wide and shallow before narrowing again downstream. Weathered beams jut out from the riverbanks, darkened by years of moisture and sun. Several planks lie half submerged near the center of the ford, warped and split but stubbornly in place. Moss clings to the wood. Nails rust quietly where they were driven generations ago. The bridge once connected two busy routes. Wagons crossed daily, carrying supplies, livestock, and families moving between settlements. The structure was simple, built quickly but strong enough to last. For many years, it served its purpose without incident. Until it did not. Heavy rains weakened the supports over time, loosening joints and rotting beams from within. Locals noticed the change, the subtle sag in the center span, the way boards shifted underfoot. Repairs were delayed, dismissed as unnecessary until something finally gave way. The collapse was sudden but incomplete. Sections broke free and fell into the river while other parts remained suspended, twisted, and unstable. The crossing was abandoned soon after, deemed unsafe and left to decay where it stood. Time passed, and the ford grew quiet. Nature reclaimed the space around the broken structure. Water flowed through gaps where planks once met cleanly. Wind moved through exposed beams, producing soft, hollow sounds. The bridge was never rebuilt. The ford was simply avoided. Visitors walking near the remains reported hearing would shift and groan as if bearing weight. The sound was unmistakable, the slow strain of planks responding to pressure. Yet no one was there. The creaks followed a pattern. They began at one end of the broken bridge and moved steadily toward the other, board by board. Each sound was deliberate, spaced as though footsteps were being placed carefully, testing each plank before moving forward. Moments of silence occurred between creaks, as if whoever crossed hesitated, adjusting balance before continuing. The rhythm was slow and cautious, never hurried, never erratic. The river did not cause it. The water level remained constant. No debris struck the wood. Wind conditions did not change. The sound came from the planks themselves, responding to pressure that could not be seen. At night, the effect intensified. Moonlight reflected off the river, casting pale light across the broken structure. The creaking grew clearer then, echoing softly across the ford. Those standing nearby felt a strange tension, as though interrupting something private and careful. No movement accompanied the sound. The planks flexed slightly, just enough to confirm weight, then settled again. Nails shifted in their holes. Wood complained quietly, exactly as it would under a slow crossing. Those who stepped closer felt unease. Standing near the bridge during the creaking produced a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to appear but never did. The air felt heavy, thick with expectation. Some visitors reported feeling vibrations beneath their feet. Not strong enough to shake the ground, but noticeable, a faint transfer of motion traveling through earth and wood together. The sensation matched the rhythm of the creaking exactly. Investigations found nothing. Engineers inspected the remaining structure, noting its instability but finding no reason for movement without cause. Cameras recorded empty frames while sound equipment captured faint, irregular creaks without visible origin. The bridge appeared to remember being used. Locals believe the crossing never learned how to stop. They say the bridge absorbed the careful steps of countless travelers, the slow weight shifts, the cautious testing of old wood over moving water. When the structure broke, that motion had nowhere to go. Now it repeats. The crossing always begins at the same side. It always ends near the center, where the bridge is most damaged. The sound never completes the full span, as if whoever crosses knows not to step where the break occurred. Then silence returns. The river flows as it always has. The planks settle. The ford grows quiet again, leaving behind only the memory of movement. No one has ever seen a figure crossing. No footprints appear on the wood. No shadows move across the planks. The sound exists alone, unsupported by sight. Those who stay too long report discomfort. A tightening in the chest. A subtle urge to step back, to give space. It feels wrong to stand where the crossing is happening, even though nothing visible occupies it. The creaking never reacts to observers. It does not stop when watched. It does not speed up or slow down in response to sound or light. It continues at its own pace, indifferent to attention. Some nights, the crossing does not occur. Other nights, it happens more than once, repeating the same careful sequence before falling silent again. There is no predictable schedule, only the certainty that it will return. By daylight, Broken Plank Ford looks unchanged. The wood lies still. The river moves gently. Birds land on exposed beams without disturbance. There is no sign that anything unusual happens after dark. Yet those who have heard it cannot forget the sound. The slow creak of wood under unseen weight. The measured progress from plank to plank. Broken Plank Ford remains where it has always been. A crossing that no longer serves its purpose yet refuses to rest. The bridge did not fully collapse, and perhaps because of that, the act of crossing never fully ended. At night, when the world grows quiet enough to listen, the old wood responds again. The old wood creaks softly under invisible weight. It creaks softly under invisible weight. As if someone is still crossing slowly, carefully, step by step, unwilling to let the journey remain unfinished. Crow Bend Crossing lies where the road curves sharply toward a narrow bridge, dipping into a low stretch of land that never quite dries. By day, it looks ordinary enough, a simple crossing framed by fields and a line of trees that lean inward as if shaped by years of wind. Drivers pass through without stopping, barely noticing the place unless traffic slows. The crossing changes when the light fades. Shadows gather early along the road, stretching farther than expected. The air cools quickly there, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Even before the sun fully sets, the place feels watched. The crows arrive first. They gather along the road in small groups, then in numbers that seem too large to ignore. They perch on guardrails, line the pavement, and cluster near the edges of the bridge. They do not caw or cry. The birds remain silent, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the road ahead. They watch passing vehicles without fear, stepping aside only at the last moment. Those who pause notice something unsettling. The crows are not focused on the people in the cars. Their attention is fixed farther down the road, toward the center of the crossing. They watch as if waiting, bodies tense, wings held close. Then, without warning, they scatter. The entire group lifts at once, wings beating hard as they flee into the trees and open sky. The sound is sudden and explosive, breaking the stillness for only a moment before silence returns. Whatever caused the reaction is never seen. Drivers report feeling it just before the birds take flight. A shift in the air. A pressure change. The sensation that something has entered the space behind or beside them. Some describe it as a presence passing through, close enough to feel but impossible to identify. Engines stall more often at Crow Bend Crossing after dark. Not always, but frequently enough to be noted. Vehicles lose power briefly, then restart without issue once moved past the bridge. Mechanics find no faults. Batteries test fine. Fuel lines are clear. Those who step out of their vehicles rarely stay long. Standing on the road at night creates a deep sense of unease. The darkness feels layered, thicker near the bridge than elsewhere. Sound behaves strangely, footsteps echoing too softly, then not at all. Crows return soon after the unseen presence passes. They settle back onto the road and rails, resuming their silent watch. The birds do not appear agitated. If anything, they seem calmer, as though the moment they anticipated has concluded. No one has seen what the crows react to. There are no figures, no lights, no movement caught on cameras. Trail cams placed nearby have captured only the birds, lifting suddenly and then returning, with no visible cause. The road remains empty during these moments. Local residents share stories cautiously. They speak of people who felt compelled to stop at the crossing, drawn by a sense that something needed attention. Some recall hearing faint sounds, like fabric moving through air or soft footsteps that never fully formed. Others mention the feeling of being passed by something just out of sight. The crossing has no history of accidents beyond the ordinary. No major events explain the behavior of the birds or the reactions of drivers. Officially, there is nothing unusual about Crow Bend Crossing at all. Yet the pattern persists. The crows gather every evening, arriving at roughly the same time. They watch the road in silence. They scatter suddenly, always in the same direction, always with urgency. They return only after the unseen moment has passed. Those who drive through often accelerate without realizing it. Something about the crossing encourages haste, a need to leave the area behind. Relief comes quickly once the road straightens and the trees thin out. The feeling fades, replaced by uncertainty about what caused it. Some drivers report checking mirrors repeatedly. They feel certain something moved alongside them, just beyond the reach of headlights. Nothing is ever there. The road behind remains empty, the bridge quiet. Animals avoid the area at night. Deer trails bend away from the crossing. Farm animals become restless when moved nearby after sunset. Dogs refuse to cross the bridge, pulling back against leashes with uncharacteristic resistance. The crows are the only creatures that remain. Their behavior suggests recognition rather than curiosity. They do not investigate. Some believe the birds are reacting to changes in the environment. Subtle shifts in air pressure. Sounds below human hearing. Movements that do not leave physical traces. Others believe the crows are responding to something older, something that does not interact with the world in visible ways. No explanation has satisfied everyone. What remains consistent is the reaction. The birds sense something approaching long before humans do. They scatter when it passes. They return when it is gone. Crow Bend Crossing stands unchanged. The bridge creaks softly with temperature changes. The road collects leaves and dust. By day, it is unremarkable, easy to dismiss as just another bend in the road. After dark, it becomes a place of attention. Drivers slow. Crows gather. The air tightens. And then, in a moment that leaves no trace, something unseen moves through, close enough to send a warning rippling through feathers and instinct. The birds take flight. The road falls silent. And those who pass through understand why locals choose another way home, leaving Crow Bend Crossing to the crows and whatever it is they watch for, night after night. Quiet Mile Road runs through open countryside where fields stretch wide and uninterrupted. The road earned its name from distance rather than sound, a long, unbroken mile without houses or fences. At its lowest point, it crosses a narrow river that usually moves gently, barely more than a bend in the landscape. For most travelers, the crossing is forgettable. Those who stop there remember it clearly. Approaching the river, the first change is subtle. Wind that stirred grass moments earlier seems to lose strength. Leaves hang still. Even on warm days, the air cools slightly, as if shaded by something unseen. The sound of tires on gravel fades faster than expected. Then the water comes into view. At Quiet Mile Road, the river surface appears perfectly smooth. Not calm in the way of a sheltered pond, but flat in a way that resists disturbance. No ripples form from breeze or passing insects. Reflections remain sharp and unbroken, holding the sky in place like glass. Insects vanish from awareness. Crickets, flies, and frogs that fill nearby fields with noise fall silent near the crossing. The quiet does not arrive gradually. It settles abruptly, like a switch thrown somewhere beyond sight. Those who notice it often pause without realizing why. Early accounts describe the stillness as comforting. Farmers crossing on foot after long days reported feeling rested after stopping briefly by the water. The quiet eased tension. The absence of movement felt orderly, complete. Some lingered longer than intended, drawn by the sensation of calm that seemed deeper than ordinary rest. Over time, other details emerged. People noticed that the river did not respond normally to touch. Tossed pebbles sank without spreading rings. Dropped leaves floated without drifting. The water accepted objects without reacting to them, as if movement were absorbed immediately. Those who waded in felt the difference instantly. The current was present, but muted. Pressure against the legs felt even and steady, lacking the irregular pull of a living stream. The sensation encouraged balance rather than resistance, making it easy to stand still. Visitors began describing a shared impulse. Standing at the bank created a strong urge to step forward. Not out of distress or confusion, but out of a sense of completion. The river felt inviting, as if it offered resolution to something unfinished. The thought of entering seemed natural, even logical, in a way that bypassed caution. Once distance increased, the urge faded quickly, replaced by unease at how persuasive it had felt. A few did not turn back. Incidents were rare and spaced over years, but they followed a similar pattern. A vehicle left parked neatly by the road. Footprints leading calmly to the water. No signs of struggle or urgency. Searches found no disturbance downstream. The river resumed its smooth surface within minutes. Authorities placed signs advising caution. They warned of unstable footing and variable depth, though neither fully explained the phenomenon. The crossing remained open, and most people passed through without incident. Those who knew the history avoided stopping. They crossed quickly, eyes forward, engines running. Researchers studied the site intermittently. Water chemistry showed nothing unusual. Temperature matched surrounding stretches. Flow measurements confirmed the river moved as expected beneath the surface. The silence could not be replicated artificially, nor could the visual stillness be sustained outside the crossing. Theories focused on perception. The road descends into a shallow bowl where sound disperses upward rather than outward. Vegetation absorbs noise. The riverbed is unusually smooth, reducing surface disruption. Combined, these factors create an environment that feels unnaturally calm. Yet perception alone does not explain the pull. People unfamiliar with the stories describe the same impulse without suggestion. The urge arrived quickly and with surprising clarity. It felt practical, as if stepping into the river were the obvious next step. Those who remained longest often reported altered sense of time. Minutes stretched without boredom. Thoughts slowed. The world narrowed to water, reflection, and breath. The silence pressed inward, not threatening, but enclosing. Local guides offer simple advice. Do not stop at the crossing. Do not stand at the edge. If you must pause, remain in your vehicle and keep the engine running. Movement breaks the effect. Stillness strengthens it. At dawn, quiet mile road looks ordinary. Birds return to nearby fields. Wind moves grass again. The river resumes gentle motion, rippling faintly as light changes. Nothing marks the crossing as dangerous or unusual. The signs seem excessive in daylight. By late afternoon, the quiet begins to gather. Sound thins. The river smooths. Insects retreat. The calm settles into place as if the land itself exhales. Travelers arriving then feel it most strongly, the sudden contrast with the world they just left. Those who pass through safely often glance back once. They notice how easy it would have been to stop. How reasonable it would have felt to step forward. The memory lingers longer than expected, resurfacing in moments of silence elsewhere. Quiet Mile Road remains open and accessible. There are no barriers, no guards, no closures. The water waits, smooth and receptive. The silence holds, complete and undisturbed. And for those who pause long enough to feel it, the urge returns, gentle and persuasive, suggesting that stepping into the river would be the simplest thing in the world. Stillwater Prairie Crossing lies far from any town, where the land stretches flat and open beneath a wide sky. The grass grows tall and pale, bending in slow waves when the wind passes through. A narrow stream cuts across the prairie, shallow and clear, moving so gently that its surface often looks motionless from a distance. The crossing is easy to miss. There are no signs, no markers, no road that clearly leads to it. Only a faint trail worn into the grass and a low dip in the land where water spreads thin over smooth stones. Travelers come upon it unexpectedly, often after hours of driving or walking through empty space. The quiet is immediate. Sound does not carry here the way it does elsewhere. Footsteps feel muted. Voices fall flat and disappear quickly. Even insects seem fewer, their buzzing distant and subdued. The air feels heavy, warm without being hot, pressing softly against the skin. Travelers come upon it unexpectedly, often after hours of driving or walking through empty space. Those who stop at the crossing often do so without realizing why. At first, it feels like relief. Muscles loosen. Shoulders drop. Breathing slows naturally, settling into a steady rhythm. The prairie stretches endlessly in every direction, offering no urgency, no reason to hurry. The water draws attention. Reflects the sky perfectly, creating the illusion of depth where there is very little. Standing at the edge, people often find themselves staring into the surface, watching clouds drift by beneath their feet. The stream makes almost no sound, slipping over stone with barely a ripple. This is when the heaviness begins. It starts subtly, a weight in the limbs that feels like the pleasant fatigue after a long day. The idea of standing becomes less appealing than it should be. Sitting feels reasonable. Necessary, even. Many lower themselves to the ground without thought. The grass near the water is soft and flattened, as if shaped by countless rests before. Sitting there feels natural, supported by the land itself. The prairie wind moves gently overhead, brushing past without disturbing the calm. Those who sit often describe a powerful sense of peace. Thoughts slow. Worries fade. The vastness of the prairie makes problems feel small and distant. The desire to move on loses its urgency. Just a few minutes of rest seems harmless. Minutes stretch. Time behaves differently at Stillwater Prairie Crossing. Without landmarks or sound, it becomes difficult to measure passing moments. Sunlight shifts slowly, barely noticeable. Shadows lengthen almost imperceptibly. The heaviness deepens. Eyelids grow warm. Blinking becomes slower. The body feels anchored to the ground, as if weight is being gently added rather than pulled away. Standing up feels unnecessary, even inconvenient. Some never do. Search records note several disappearances linked to the crossing, though none are officially attributed to it. People are last seen stopping there. Vehicles found parked nearby. Belongings left neatly arranged. No signs of struggle or distress. When searchers arrive, they often feel the same pull. Teams are instructed to rotate frequently, to keep moving, to avoid sitting near the water. Those who linger report strong drowsiness, a powerful urge to rest despite clear understanding of the risk. More than one search has been cut short when team members became too fatigued to continue safely. Local stories speak of the prairie itself as the cause. They say Stillwater Prairie Crossing sits at a place where the land settles inward, where movement naturally slows and collects. Over time, the prairie learned how to hold stillness, how to encourage rest until rest becomes permanent. According to these accounts, the stream is not dangerous. It does not pull. It does not trap. It offers comfort. The danger lies in accepting that comfort too completely. Older travelers warn never to stop at the crossing after midday. They say the effect is strongest when the sun begins its slow descent, when light softens and the prairie grows quieter. At those times, the crossing feels especially inviting, as if waiting for someone to sit down and stay. Researchers have attempted to study the area. Measurements show slightly lower sound frequency movement, creating a subtle vibration that can affect the nervous system. Air pressure remains stable. Oxygen levels are normal. None of this fully explains the overwhelming sleepiness reported. The phenomenon remains consistent across seasons. In summer, the warmth amplifies the heaviness. In winter, the stillness feels sharper, more pronounced, though fewer travelers risk stopping then. Even in early spring, when water runs higher and grass is new, the crossing retains its quiet pull. Those who leave describe lingering effects. Some feel unusually tired for days afterward. Others dream of sitting in tall grass beneath a wide sky, unable to stand no matter how much they want to. The dreams fade with time, but the memory of the crossing remains vivid. Children raised in distant towns hear stories about places where the prairie sleeps. Stillwater Prairie Crossing is often mentioned without name, described only as a place where stopping is a mistake. Parents tell them to drink water, keep moving, and never sit near quiet streams in empty land. Most heed the advice. Those who return to the crossing often do so briefly, wary of its calm. They stand only long enough to look, careful not to linger, careful not to let their thoughts drift. Even then, many feel the weight settle in almost immediately, a reminder of how easily rest becomes surrender. At dusk, the crossing changes subtly. The prairie darkens. The stream reflects deeper colors, turning almost black beneath the sky. The heaviness grows stronger, pressing gently but persistently. Sitting feels more inviting than ever. This is when the crossing is most dangerous. By night, it becomes difficult to tell where land ends and water begins. The sense of direction fades. The prairie offers no sound to guide movement. Those who sit at this hour often do not rise again. Stillwater Prairie Crossing remains unmarked. No fences block the path. No signs warn travelers. The land does not announce its nature. It simply waits, wide and patient, offering rest to anyone willing to stop. Those who pass through quickly may never notice. Those who pause feel it immediately. The calm. The heaviness. The deep, irresistible urge to sit by the water just a little longer. And for some, that gentle stillness becomes the last place they ever choose to remain. Held quietly by a prairie that never asks them to move again. You have now traveled across 20 haunted Prairie River crossings in Iowa. Places where journeys were interrupted. Where water claimed lives. And where the land never forgot. These crossings may seem harmless in daylight. Just shallow water and quiet roads. But when night falls, the prairie listens. The river remembers. And the past rises with the mist. If you ever find yourself approaching a flooded road at night, stop. Turn around. And trust your instincts. Because some crossings are more than roads. They are thresholds. Thank you for spending this unsettling journey with me. Slow your breathing. Let the sound of flowing water fade away. And if you hear splashing somewhere nearby tonight, remember. Not every crossing is meant to be crossed. Until our next journey into the darkness, stay safe.